Keen to hear what she has to say about Donald Trump and America. I was very struck yesterday with what happened at the Arc de Triomphe and the comments made by Macron, which I'll talk about later, that I think we're on the verge of a new Cold War between the European Union and the USA, an ideological Cold War. Meanwhile, up in Brussels, there are negotiations that have been going on through most of the night. The Cabinet meets tomorrow morning. And basically, we've got until Wednesday to come to some agreement with Mr. Barnier if there's to be a special conference later on this month and a deal put to Parliament before Christmas. Again, we'll talk more about that. But, you know, we seem to obsess, I think, about the Conservative Party splits. Boris again today, writing him a telegraph, calling for a cabinet mutiny, saying that he thinks, we really are being sold out in the most extraordinary way, the biggest political failure since Suez, which, of course, his brother says as well, although from a different side, a different argument. So we talk about Tory splits all the time. We're really not focusing, folks, enough on the Labour Party. And I say that because in Der Spiegel magazine last week, Jeremy Corbyn did an interview, and he couldn't have been clearer. He said, we can't stop Brexit. And what his own party needs to do is to recognise the reasons why people voted leave. So that's the leader of the Labour Party a few days ago. I won't mention the way he looked at the cenotaph yesterday. I'm sure you've made your own minds up on that. Let's stick to the politics of it. So you can't stop Brexit, and yet here was Sir Keir Starmer, Shadow Brexit Secretary, talking to Nick Ferrari on LBC this morning.
The Labour Party position obviously was much discussed at our Labour Party conference in September, and we had a motion that the whole party agreed, Jeremy, myself, everybody else, and that makes it clear that we will face each decision as it comes. Obviously, the deal, if there is one, will have to be voted on in the next few weeks, and we've said that if that doesn't meet our conditions, we'll vote against it and call for a general election. If that doesn't happen, that all options must remain on the table, and that includes the option of a public vote. So that's the position that the whole party has got around.
So Mr. Corbyn's wrong, Sir Keir, because he's saying we can't. I mean, it's pretty unequivocal. We can't stop it, but I'm hearing from you it can be stopped.
Well, yes, but we've got to look at the decisions as they arise. And as I say, the first decision is actually on the deal, then a question about a general election, and then other options. So that's the structured approach. And Jeremy and I and the whole party voted for that at our party conference.
Before we move on, doesn't someone need to tell Mr. Corbyn this? Because he's obviously under the view that it can't be stopped. You don't get more definite than that. We can't stop it. My goodness.
Well, as I say, Nick, we've all agreed the party position, and Jeremy is not attempting to alter that party position. And
so just to clarify, it can be stopped. For my listeners, it can be stopped.
Yes, but we've got to look at the decisions as they arise and where the votes are, in the sense that what are the votes on the deal? Is the Prime Minister going to get it through? Is there going to be a deal? Obviously, that's the critical question for this week.
Right.
And then if there is, if she doesn't get a deal that goes through, then obviously we are into a position where we will call for a general election, and then other options will need to be considered. But at the moment, we're in this sort of monthly crisis of the question of whether there's actually going to be a deal or not.
They're all over the shop, aren't they? And just to confirm that, here was Shadow Foreign Secretary Emily Thornberry on Mar yesterday.
The fact that we had a referendum and the results of the referendum ought to be abided by. But we do need to have an injection of democracy in between the result of the referendum and us going any further. And we've always said that. And what we wanted was a meaningful vote. And Theresa May is simply giving us a devil in the deep blue sea. She's saying, you can either fall off a cliff or get on this bridge to nowhere, and you're going to have to vote on that. That's not a meaningful vote. That's not an injection of democracy. So we say, if you're going to give us that, then, we refuse to play that sort of game. And frankly, if you can't come up with a decent suggestion, then we should have a general election. If we don't have a general election, which we think we should have, then yes, of course, all the options remain on the table, and we would, campaign for there to be a people's vote. But, there are several stages before.
Well, it's not all that clear listening to her, is it? Really, it's a series of stages ending up perhaps with backing a people's vote. Now, I don't know what the collective noun for former prime ministers is, but we've had John Major, of course, telling us there must be a second referendum. We've had Tony Blair repeatedly telling us there must be a second referendum. And former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown spoke on this subject today.
I think the public will be shocked, because 80% of them want this to be over, to find that 2 years from now we will still be debating our relationship with the customs union, with the single market, whether we're going to be like Canada or Norway, whether we'll be able to sign free trade deals, what's the situation in Northern Ireland. This is inevitably on the agenda in further negotiations, even if there is a deal over the next 2 years. And what I want to see is a better process of taking this out of the Whitehall bubble, taking it out of Westminster so that there is discussion in the country. I want the public to be able to give their views. I want us to listen and engage in a way that people who voted in the referendum wanted to be listened to. And my fear at the moment is ever more division, sense of betrayal, loss of trust if we don't actually take this debate out of Westminster and make sure that the public can have their voice heard.
So, Gordon Brown thinks there should be a second referendum and believes there will be one. Keir Starmer making it clear that Brexit can be stopped. Emily Thornberry confirming that if the deal comes to Parliament, what they really want is a general election, but if not, which is not going to happen, is it? Unless Mrs May really wants to go through that pain again, and then they'll push for a people's vote. But Corbyn making it clear that Labour can't stop Brexit, and we need to recognise the reasons why people voted leave. So, does anyone out there have any idea of whether Labour want to stop Brexit or not? Anyone, please help me. Come and tell me. I don't know. 0345 6060 973. Maybe you think, truth is, they're as split as the Tories, in which case text to 84850. And I'm particularly keen to hear from you if you're a Labour Party member who feels pretty confused and perhaps worried as to what the electoral implications of this could well be for the Labour Party. If that's who you are, let me know by tweeting using the hashtag Farage and LBC at LBC. And of course, you can watch us on Facebook and comment there too. Tom is a new caller from Brighton. Good evening, Tom.
Good evening, Mr. Farage. How is Strasbourg treating you?
Strasbourg, well, I've just arrived, really, but I'm looking forward to Mrs Merkel tomorrow, but more of that tomorrow. Tom, tell me, do you know what the Labour Party position really is?
I don't think any political party knows what their own party's position is on Brexit, it seems. If you look back at the history of the European Union, or back in the days when it was like the EEC and the EC,
Yes.
There's always been division, right down the middle. And you've seen it in the referendum. Yes, Leave won, short majority, but it was still a win nonetheless. I'm a Remainer myself. I voted Remain. And I'll look back on it, I'm disappointed by the result. But then again, I've been disappointed in election results in the past, and I've moved on. The thing with Brexit is...
So should the country move on, Tom, in a sense that we've got a result? Should we just get on with this?
Yes, I think there is. I think the second referendum will hinder us in the future. We're really in a difficult position as it is with the negotiations. Tories aren't helping it. I don't think Labour are helping themselves. I think Labour really just need to focus on holding the Conservatives to account. The Tories are in government, and Labour, as you know, Her Majesty's loyal opposition, they need to really focus on the nitty and gritty. We're going to have a Brexit. Brexit's going to happen. We're leaving. Accept it. But this is what we want. That's what the Labour Party should be like. This is what we need.
Okay.
This is what we want.
I mean, Tom, I do take your point that if you go back to the start of this, or when it really kicked off in the 1970s, you had Roy Jenkins on one wing of the Labour Party, pro, Tony Benn on the other wing, anti. In the Tories, you had Edward Heath, pro, Enoch Powell, again. So you're quite right. The ability of this issue to divide parties has always been there. But don't you think, in terms of our national debate, that we do deserve to hear it? I mean, Theresa May's position is at least backed by the Cabinet, all right? That is the official Tory position. From Labour, we're getting no clarity at all, are we?
No, and my point kind of goes on with what you've just said there about how there's been splits in the parties back in the 70s when it all happened. It's almost like as if it's a political issue where if you're on one side, it doesn't show what aspects of the political spectrum you are in. This is such a unique, niche political issue that really no party can represent one side of the argument. It represents, all parties are representing all sides of them because they're all split down the middle.
And that, Tom, was why UKIP came into being. UKIP came into being because of that, because at least UKIP had a unified... Mind you, to be fair, the Lib Dems are unified in their view. They are pro, and they want us to stay in. Tom, thank you for that, and Tom makes a fair point. The splits, this issue, has always been a nightmare for poor political parties. But at least the Theresa May position is the official position. From Labour, there isn't one, folks. I can't work it out. If there is, you tell me. Philip in Whiteleaf says by text, Nigel, Labour are even more split than the Conservatives. Every time one of the Labour MPs open their mouths, they have a different opinion on Brexit. Actually, Philip, I think the truth of it is that Labour are very split in the country because 40% of their voters voted for Brexit. But I think in the House of Commons there is quite a big, strong pro-EU majority, and sort of answer my own question, as to whether Labour want to stop Brexit or not. My guess is, as and when we come to a vote on this, my guess is that most Labour MPs will do all they can to stop Brexit. And I think this is an issue where Jeremy Corbyn is just not in control of his party. And, he may well have all these young new members that have joined up, the momentum types that are there, but actually they are adopting a pro-EU position. It's one area here where Corbyn is not governing his own party, and frankly, I don't think there's much prospect of him doing so in the short term. Alice on Facebook says, I will never vote again. What is the point? Alice, I sense there are very, very large numbers of people out there saying exactly that. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show, exclusively on LBC, and it's now 6:15. So Jeremy Corbyn says you can't stop Brexit. Sir Keir Starmer says you can stop Brexit, and Gordon Brown says there's going to be a second referendum. I mean, can anyone out there have any idea of whether Labour actually want to stop Brexit or not? Anyone? Mustafa in Barnet, who's a new caller. Can you help me, Mustafa? What is their position?
Hi, Nigel. How are you?
Hello there, welcome. I'm very, very well, thank you. But they really are, as a party, at the top, all over the shop on this, aren't they?
Well, I actually disagree. I think they have a unified view, and if you don't mind, I'll explain.
Please help all of us, Mustafa, please.
A pleasure. So I think the issue here is Labour's position depends on what deal comes back and a series of outcomes, right? But they have a plan. Depending on what the outcome is, they know what they're going to do. And that's the thing. I think that's what's confusing people. It really does depend on what deal Theresa May comes back, whether, how it gets voted in the House of Commons, and, and what happens after that. Now, you said before, do they want to stop Brexit? I don't think it's that simple. As I was telling your guy before, what they want is an injection of democracy from the final deal to the outcome. What form that democracy can take can be variable, right? But one form is that people vote, as long as there is some democracy. And that makes sense, When we voted in 2016, we didn't know what the final deal was going to be.
Mustafa, yeah? You're talking about democracy, and it's a very, very important word, and particularly, we had all the armistice commemorations yesterday, which was all about democratic nation states, so it's important. Yeah. But Mustafa, democracy. We had a referendum on this, having been denied one for nearly half a century, and then we had a general election a year afterwards in which the two leading players both told us they would implement the Brexit result. Now, how much more democracy does this process need?
Okay,
We've done it. We've done it twice.
No, two things to that. Firstly, democracy, as you highlighted, is an ongoing process. And especially when something changes dramatically, you do need to have reinjections of democracy. So and I know you're a fan of direct democracy, but that's one of the problems of direct democracy is when do you have the next referendum? We see this with the Scottish referendums, etc. And that's why we have representative parliamentary...
Mustafa, I think there is an argument on these key constitutional issues that once every generation, once every 20, 25 years, you vote on these issues. What I object to so much is people like Keir Starmer or Gordon Brown, effectively are telling me that I ought to have another referendum before this one's even been implemented.
Well, no, it's when there's a change in the possible
There is no
outcome,
change.
And
there is no change.
Well, no, because now we have the final deal. That's the big difference, right? So the idea is you need to have injections, if you're going to go down the direct democracy route, right, which is fair enough. You need to have changes, you need to have injections of direct democracy, or otherwise, remember, Labour are not asking for direct democracy necessarily. They could have a parliamentary vote. A meaningful parliamentary vote would do for the Labour Party. And that's why it's so clear to me. It can be as long as there's an injection of some form of democracy.
Well, there is going to be a vote.
Been a change.
There is going to be a
It's not
vote.
gonna be a meaningful vote. It's basically, jump off a cliff, right? Or have this really bad deal, which isn't a meaningful vote. So what Labour are asking for is some form of meaningful democracy, and that the meaningful bit is the most important part. It has to be something that
Isn't the truth of it that, the vast majority of Labour MPs treat the referendum result with total and utter contempt and would like it to be reversed? Isn't that really the truth?
Not really, because if you look at the evidence, they triggered Article 50, so they do believe in the results of the referendum. Because otherwise, if they didn't believe it, they wouldn't have triggered Article 50. Now,
well, maybe Mustafa, that would have been political suicide at that moment in time.
That is a very wrong, but that's the way democracy works. You mentioned before that, both parties did say, they were going to take us out of the EU, which they're both saying they will continue doing, as long as there's that meaningful injection. But
and the single market and the customs union.
I think that's debatable.
They're lying through their teeth to us, these people, aren't they?
But remember, the more important point is democracy does what you say in for example, in elections can change. Theresa May promised a lot of stuff in that election, which she backtracked on. The old age pensioners tax. She backtracked. The one with the homes. She backtracked on that. Things do change, and we have to appreciate that change. Otherwise,
Mustafa,
it becomes a dictatorship.
I can accept another referendum 20 years down the road when we've left and seen how it works out. Before then, I think it's an outrage, but you've made your arguments very, very well indeed, and I thank you for calling us for the first time. Gary in Horsham says to me by text, the collective noun for ex-prime ministers is a shambles. I quite like that. If Corbyn gets in, it will become qualified by the adjective disgraceful. A disgraceful shambles. Yes, Gary, but with a very nice anorak and bright red tie. Dale from Chester is another new caller to the show. Dale, enlighten me. Are Labour going to go all out to stop Brexit?
Nigel, I just want to say one thing. I voted for Brexit. I'm a Brexiteer. And it infuriates me listening to you on this programme, knowing that you've left us in a right mess. We're now stuck with a Conservative Party and a Labour Party that are totally divided. There's no party there or anyone to support people. I didn't vote for a deal. I voted to leave the EU.
Yes.
Now, I'm bored of being told by all these parties that I should be getting the fair deal that I want. I don't want a deal. I want to leave. I voted to leave, and that's it.
Yes. Dale, I'm absolutely certain that the vast majority of Leave voters would agree with that. There was no qualification on this. It was we voted to leave the institutions of the European Union. It couldn't be simpler, could it?
Well, exactly. But, UKIP as a party, you said this all, we've got Liberal Democrats that are pro-stay, and, UKIP was the party that I decided to follow because you were pro-Brexit, and where are they now? Where's our voice in this argument? We've got a Prime Minister that's obviously a Remainer, the opposition are Remainers. Where do we go? Where's our voice,
Dale, do you know something? Honestly, and I'll tell you this, I've been really, in the last couple of weeks, inundated by messages from people I've never met before, never spoken to before, saying, who the hell do we vote for? And that because they feel as you do, and the perception is that UKIP is just not in this race at the moment, and is, in the doldrums in terms of the polls. But, Dale, not much I can do about that. I was there for 20 years. That was long enough for me. Thank you. Rudy in Bristol is my next caller. Good evening, Rudy.
Hi, Nigel. I'd like to break this into two parts. Because obviously, continue from the caller previous to the one that's just called. The first thing is, obviously, Labour are pro-Remain, hence why Tony Blair allowed mass immigration for cheap labour for big businesses in the past. Because Labour is no longer about the people of this country anymore. It's about big business and maximising their profits. And I think that Keir Starmer is going against Corbyn because he's got his eye on Corbyn's job in the future. I believe that's what he's looking to do.
You may be right, Rudy, you may be right. And, of course, in generational terms, Corbyn is, well, he may have a good few many years left in him, but he hasn't got that many, has he?
No, and with regards to the caller twice before, and he says that, we should have it because it's dramatic change. Well, we had a dramatic change from what we were stitched up on in 1975. And my question is, Had the vote gone the other way, where it was 50%, 52% Remain and 48% Leave, would it mean then that they didn't know what they were voting for, but did they vote for a
Rudy,
hard Brexit
there'd be
where
no discussion. There'd be no discussion. There'd be no debate. Anybody that was calling for another referendum would be laughed out of court. They'd get no coverage. LBC would be doing zero debates on it because despite how people may have felt about the result, you would not have had Parliament, big business, and many strong global influences making this argument. Rudy, it would have been a dead duck. Thank you. Going to run down to Reading and speak to Toby. Toby, good evening. Are you clear, Toby? What, you know, our Labour, what's the position, Toby? Help me, please. I'm struggling.
Well, how could I? No, so I realised I actually have to rush to another call. Just a quick observation. It's a bit like I used to be in a student union, and you know, you haven't totally worked out which way is up at that age. You know, you sort of think you have, but not really. And Keir Starmer was so vague. It's so vague, and it makes me feel really uncomfortable, you know, whether I was voting for Labour or not. And I think their biggest problem is a lot of their voters want Brexit, and that's
right.
it.
That's right. But you say vague, but there's one thing that he did say to Nick Ferrari. He did say Brexit can be stopped, and Corbyn says it can't be stopped. And that's coming right from the top of the party. It's a mess, isn't it?
So they are ambivalent. That's
ambivalent.
The closest I can get. Yes.
That's a very, very polite word to describe their current position apropos of the voters. Toby, thank you very much indeed. Stephen Hampstead says 2019 will be the year people realise they have no political representation. Thankfully, there is no far right in the UK. But once the political elite have betrayed us, the future looks bleak. Chris tweets, the stances of any of the political parties doesn't matter. The only thing that really matters is that they obey the rule of democracy, something that has guided the Western world for 1,000 years. Chris says, Brexit or civil war, be warned, Ramonas. Well, Chris, that's not what we want, not physically, but democratically, yes, I'm all for. I'm all for battles being fought through the ballot box, but through no other method. And Kim says, we need a general election. We need it soon. Kim, do you actually think that would sort anything out? I suspect at a general election, we still wouldn't know what the Labour Party's position on Brexit was. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC, and it's now 6:30. So senior Labour figures are openly contradicting each other about what Brexit means, whether it can be stopped or not. And I'm asking you, tell me, help me, is Labour all out now to stop Brexit or not? Yesterday, of course, was the centenary of the armistice, and we covered that here. I was on the Sunday show going over that period. Had a very interesting interview with the Earl of Weems about one of his forebears who had actually been the British signatory on the armistice and how Lloyd George had wanted it to be at 2:30, not at 11 o'clock. And we also had a poem, and it won first prize in the 9 to 11-year-old category of the Royal British Legion's World War I Centenary Poetry Competition by Nicole Zeng. And that was an absolute smash hit yesterday, a fantastic poem by somebody of 11 years old. And you can go to lbc.co.uk to get my interview with Jamie Weems. You can go on to LBC's Twitter and get the Nicole Zeng poem. It's fantastic. Meanwhile, of course, the big international commemoration was taking place at the Arc de Triomphe. 60 world leaders were there. And President Macron could not resist the opportunity to use the armistice centenary for an overtly political speech. I mean, the man can't help himself. It was all about praising the European Union. And then, quite bizarrely, going on to say that the millions of soldiers who died in the Great War did so to defend universal values, and particularly those of France. He said, that they were there, and that patriotism is exactly the opposite of nationalism. Patriotism, in fact, he basically says that what is going on, if you're a nationalist, you're betraying patriotism. And he's really going in a very strange direction by saying that patriotism means that you don't put the interests of your own country first. What he means is you put the interests of the European Union or the United Nations first. I mean, it's a very strange thing to have done. So I just thought I'd very quickly. It's always useful to have a look at the Oxford English Dictionary. And patriotism there is devotion to and vigorous support for one's own country. That's the definition, Mr. Macron. And interestingly, one of the synonyms for that, is nationalism. And the very opposite of it, the antonym, is treachery. So Macron is trying to rewrite language, to change words around, to have a different meaning. And it's all about building a European Union with an army, a European Union that becomes a global empire. And if they honestly think 100 years on that that's what's going to bring us peace and stability in the world, frankly, I think they've been driven mad by their own desire to have a euro and to unify Europe. And I think it's actually appalling that it was politicised in the way that it was, because all of this about not putting your own country first was said with Trump sitting yards away, with Orban sitting yards away. And I think we're entering a new Cold War between the European Union and the USA. A Cold War, an ideological Cold War. That is where we are going. And we've seen European Commissioner after Commissioner in the last week stand up and basically be abusive about the United States of America. They are hell-bent here on being a full military power. And you can say it's Walter Mitty in terms of the resources they've got, but they're going to do it anyway. I'm going to go to Irene's tweet first, because she makes a really powerful point. She says, we all know that Corbyn has hated the European Union for over 25 years. Time for him to stand up, be a man, and gain huge support from the people of this country. Whichever party goes against the will of the people, they'll suffer for years to come. As for Gordon Brown, butt out of it. No former Prime Ministers, Irene, like to get involved in this. Let's go to Rhys in Swansea, who's a new caller to the show. Welcome, Rhys.
Hi, Nigel.
So, are Labour going to go all out, do you think, in the next couple of months to stop Brexit?
No, I don't think they know what their position is. I was a Labour leaver campaigning in Carmarthenshire area, in the Swansea area, South Wales, and I used to get hurled abuse out in the street, etc. But even by Labour members as well, and I was a member at the time. But they haven't got. They don't know what their position is. They're trying to play all fields, and they're doing it pretty badly. But that tweet that you said was quite right. He needs to pick a side. And if he had any leadership skills or intelligence about him, he would have picked the side that voted to leave, and he would be countering, and his approval ratings would be going through the roof for that part of it, because this is such an important issue. I think that a lot of people will vote only on this issue if there was a general election. I wouldn't vote Labour on this issue. If the Conservatives put somebody in like Jacob Rees-Mogg or possibly Boris Johnson, I would vote for them solely on this issue, and I've never ever voted Conservative in my life. And coming from a Welsh valley, you can imagine how much of a task that would be for us to vote Conservative.
Yeah.
I also think that Theresa May is deliberately sabotaging this process, and I'm convinced that there's going to be, I'm more convinced now than ever, there'll be a second referendum, because you cannot possibly be this blind arrogance that she has, this blind arrogance to what everybody around is saying, this deal is no good, and she's just continuing with it.
I mean, if her policy was deliberate sabotage of the Brexit process, she'd be doing a hell of a good job, Rhys. And one or two conspiracy theorists tell me it has been from the start. I find it difficult to believe, but, well, I have to say, even I do scratch my head sometimes. And, Rhys, it's interesting because we talk a lot about the Labour Leave vote in the north of England, the Labour Leave vote in the Midlands, but the Labour Leave vote in South Wales is very substantial, isn't it?
It's huge, and you hear the rhetoric from Labour, Welsh Labour and Plaid Cymru. It's nonsense. The people in these valleys, I'm from the valleys, and I speak a lot to people here, they voted to leave. They want to leave. These are old coal mining towns. They don't care about the colours of skins and things like that. They don't. The Welsh valleys are very accepting like that. But what they don't want is the huge competition for jobs. I mean, there was a job for a barista, a coffee maker, locally. 300 applications in 2 days. They had to close it for a barista. This is like a minimum wage job. It's just unbelievable. But I think
and let alone, Rhys, what has happened to steel in South Wales with the British government being impotent and unable to help it in any way at all. Rhys, thank you for that call. I think South Wales folks, just think about that more and more and more. There are lots of people like Rhys down there in South Wales. I know Labour have quite big majorities in many of those seats. Doesn't mean they're not vulnerable. So a couple of people here now saying, come on, Jeremy Corbyn, we know you're a Brexiteer. Tell Sir Keir Starmer to go to hell, stand up, lead, and the country might just come with you. Mary in Hemel Hempstead tweets, another referendum will change nothing and only prove that the man in the street's vote is worthless. No Brexit, and I'll never vote again. Mary, I'm beginning to feel there are millions of people saying they may never, ever vote again. Ian in Eastbourne helps me. The collective noun for former PMs is definitely has-beens. Let's go to Matthew in Heathrow, who is known to me. Matthew, good evening. Welcome back.
Evening, Nigel. Basically, Keir Starmer is just stating the obvious. If the deal she's going to bring back to Parliament, she's trying to get the best deal for the country, and if Parliament doesn't accept it, or is the option to her is then to put it to the people in a separate second referendum. And basically,
well, Matthew, she could. Now, given that we do have an EU withdrawal bill, she could take that final vote and ignore it. She could legally, she could do that. I think the odds of her doing it, though, are very limited.
Well, no, she said she'll give them a meaningful vote, and if they don't accept it, she's got to then put it back to the people, and basically, I don't think you're going to like the choice. It's either going to be accept the deal she brings back, what would be the best she's managed to achieve, or it's going to be remain on what David Cameron has.
Matthew, do you know something? Do you know something? Not only is Westminster going to vote on this, but the absolute final vote, and it's binding, is going to be here in Strasbourg. And you've just outlined the great dilemma that I'm going to face when it comes here. If I'm asked to vote for this deal, or effectively perhaps to risk by voting it down, a situation where we get a second referendum, that's going to be a hell of a tough decision for me to make. I have to say, Matthew, I just feel at the moment that what she's proposing and what they're debating in Cabinet tomorrow, given there is effectively a Barnier deadline of Wednesday for us to get this on the table, have a mini-conference, get the votes done, the parliamentary vote in Westminster done before Christmas, effectively, we're going to be trapped in something that's even worse than EU membership, continued jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. So Matthew, you're right. Everything on the table is bad. But do you think, when it really comes to it, that Labour will be part of that process that brings this deal down?
Well, basically, I believe that she's going to come back with the best deal, because basically David Davis was on the negotiations and Boris Johnson was on the cabinet, and they basically couldn't get what they want, so they just left and they deserted it. Well, they should have stayed to try to get a better deal. And, you've now got to accept, it would be crazy to leave without a deal. So,
well, I don't think so. We'll debate that another time, Matthew, but thank you. You're listening to the Nigel Farage Show here on LBC. The time is now 6:46. Well, we've got a few views coming in here. I don't think there'll be a deal. Too many Remainers have lobbied the EU to refuse any compromise in the hope that we will never leave without a deal and Brexit will be abandoned. Well, Nigel, in Notting Hill, there is a lot of talk of collusion out there. And Caroline says that Macron thinks he's the new Napoleon Bonaparte and the EU will be his empire. Look what happened to Napoleon, she says. Wesley in Manchester is calling me. Wesley, are Labour going to go full out to stop Brexit?
I think it's happening, Nigel, but it's happening behind Corbyn's back and a few of us, the vast majority of us who want to respect what the vote was. I wanted to remain, but I also know that we need to respect the vote, which was to leave. And yes. I think Jeremy's been almost handcuffed by the likes of the Hillary Benn and Chucker and Watson and Starmer and Neil Kinnock's son. Only pro-Blairite.
And they're nearly, Wesley, all Londoners, aren't they? It's nearly all London.
Well, what I do know, though, is that they're quite happy for us to go to war illegally. They've just got. There is no way that they should be in the Labour Party. There's a party for you. It's called the Tories, you know. But these people, I think, have boxed him in, Jeremy Corbyn, and they're going to end up with this. You know, it'll be on the Labour manifesto. You know. Or they'll try and go for this where you've got various options, and it's just typical Blairite type of Mandelson speak, where they triangulate the argument, and you end up baffled as to even what you wanted when you went in there for, and they walk away with the goods.
And Wesley, as a Labour-supporting Remainer that wants to genuinely respect the vote...
Remember, Nigel.
Yeah, no, I got that sense from what you were saying. You know, but given your position, just tell me very quickly, how much electoral damage do you think this could do Labour if they are seen to have gone against Brexit?
Sorry, wrong phrase. It'll proper split the party, because I think a lot of people in the Labour Party, they are socialists, and don't misunderstand this, but they're nationalists as well, the British. And
they're patriots, Wesley. They're patriots.
I'll go with that. But they're socialists as well, a vast majority up here in the north. But the thing is, if Labour have them over... You know, by, like I say, almost triangulating the argument and putting out various, you know, second referendum, it's only on this, on that. It's not. People have said, we need to leave. And I say that, you know, let's go for it again, but in 25 years' time, that's when it'll be legit.
Great call. Thank you. I'm off to Edinburgh to speak to Kenneth. Kenneth, a new caller to the show. Good evening.
Good evening, Nigel.
So what do you make of it?
I think that the Parliamentary Labour Party, not the whole Labour Party, but the Parliamentary Labour Party is determined to stop Brexit.
Yes.
But of course that makes them no different from a great many Tory MPs either, does it?
Yeah, no, that's right. I mean, my observation, Kenneth, is that the Labour Party is relatively united in the Commons, but very split in the country. That's pretty much how I see it.
Yeah, but of course, you know, on the news tonight with Gordon Brown, and they're really trying to bring on the big beasts to try and reverse the... Well, the reason why they want another referendum is because they have absolutely nothing to lose. And that's the whole point of it. It's got nothing to do with a people's vote on the deal or whether we should have the deal or not. They have nothing to lose because they lost the referendum and the only referendum, and they think by having another second crack they can change the result.
Yep, they do, Kenneth, and I think it's a disgrace. What do you think?
Well, you know, like the rest of the callers, you know, a bit fed up with the democratic process of this happening.
Yeah.
But what I'm concerned about, Nigel, is that I hear a lot of your listeners say who are Brexiteers, and they're saying, oh, bring on a second referendum because we'll win again. But I'm not so sure about that.
Well, it's interesting, Kenneth, because I've got a tweet here from Brian in Surrey. He says, this is just what they all want. All leavers never to vote again. They've won. And in a sense, Brian puts his finger on something. That a lot of those people who voted leave, Kenneth, had never voted in their lives. So many reports of people turning up at polling stations saying, what do we do? And if they can be just worn down by this process, their hope is they could win a second referendum because they would have sown disenchantment in the Leave camp.
I'm sure, Nigel, that they have already had people computing how many Brexit voters are likely to have died over the past 2 years and how many youngsters will be coming on the voters' roll. And what I'm also concerned about is that I actually think that in a second referendum, the Remainers might just about neck it because, you know, I think there's probably more waverers on the Brexit side, although I'm a positive Brexiteer.
No, Kenneth, I don't agree with that. I really don't agree with that. My impression is the Brexiteers are very firm in what they believe, and half of the Remain vote were people saying, well, you know, I've got a business, I've got a nice house, I don't want to take the risk and fear a change. But, Kenneth, thank you for your call. If we do get a second referendum, my hope is that actually people will say, this is a disgrace. This is our chance to rebel against the political establishment. Mark in South Bank is a new caller. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Nigel, from the South Bank. Now, picture this. I'm in my local polling station.
Yep.
I've got my pencil on the string, hovering over the box next to Labour.
Yep.
The Labour. And I'm wondering, which Labour am I voting for? Is it the Labour of Jeremy Corbyn?
Yes.
Or is it the Labour of Keir Starmer?
That's a good point.
So what do I do?
Yeah, it's a good point. No, absolutely, Mark. Because you could argue that within the Conservative Party, but here, these are the people at the very top of the Labour Party, aren't they?
Right.
And they got away with it in 2017.
Yeah.
They got away with it. They got Leavers in South Wales and the North and the Midlands to still vote for them, and Remainers in London to vote for them. They can't do it again, Mark, surely.
No.
So I don't know. I mean, do you normally vote Labour, Mark?
No, I'm what Jonathan Dimbleby called a floating voter.
Right. Okay.
I used to appear on his shows years ago, but I'm not really. I mean, it's usually the default position is, dare I admit this, Liberal Democrat.
Right.
But
well, of course you can.
You should be like a gambler's streak.
You should be proud of who you've had. And actually, Mark, if you think there should be an exit from Brexit, the truth of it is the Lib Dems are the right party to vote for because they're not hiding it. That's what they stand for.
Right. So maybe that solves my dilemma then.
Well, there you are. If you're a firm Remainer, Mark, who thinks the referendum needs to be overturned, it's not a position I agree with or respect. But if that's how you feel, then it's the Lib Dems for you. Thank you very much indeed. Victoria in Kingston says to me, "I was disgusted with Macron yesterday. How dare he use a day like yesterday to talk about anything other than the brave men and women of World War I. I believe he angered the people of France last week too, with certain comments surrounding the war. Yes, and also talking about the USA being a potential enemy and the absolute need for a European army. He really is perfectly awful." I've been saying for weeks, I think the government deal, which she's going to get, of course she is, there was a 70%, 30% chance in favour of it going through Parliament. I have to say, I do wonder, with Joe Johnson from the Conservative Party, with much that's happening here, I begin to think the chances of her deal getting through are not as good as 70-30. Not, of course, that I ever liked it anyway. I sense, folks, we're heading for a big crisis. I'll be back tomorrow to report on Mrs. Merkel. I'll be with you at 6 o'clock. At 10 tonight, it's Tom Swarbrick. But up next, it's Ian Dale.